वै चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी प्रभुपाद की। इस्कॉन फाउंडर आचार्य बीबीटी फाउंडर आचार्य श्रीला प्रभुपाद की। जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस प्रयोजकाचार्य अस्तोत्र सत श्री श्रीमद् भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती ठाकुर गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की। निताय गौर प्रेमानंदी हरि हरि बोल। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Hare Krishna, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, Answers by citing the Lord's version. Text 1. Shri Sukha Uvacha Atma Mayamrite Rajan Parsayanu Bhavatmana Na ghate tartha sambandha Swapna drashtur ivanjasa. Shri Sukha Uvacha Atma Mayamrite Rajan Parsayanu Bhavatmana Nagate tartha sambandha Swapna drashtur ivanjasa. Shri Sukha Uvacha Atma Mayamrite Rajan Parsayanu Bhavatmana Nagate tartha sambandha Swapna drashtur ivanjasa. Shri Sukha Uvacha Atma Mayamrite Rajan Parsayanu Bhavatmana Nagate tartha sambandha Swapna drashtur ivanjasa. Shri Sukha Uvacha Atma Mayamrite Rajan Parasyanu Bhavatmana Nagate tartha sambandha Swapna drashtur ivanjasa. Shri Sukha Uvacha Nachamayarite Rajan Parasyanu Bhavatmana Nagate tartha sambandha Swapna drashtur ivanjasa. Mataji. Shri Sukha Uvacha Parasyanu Bhavatmana Swapna drashtur ivanjasa. Shri Sukha Uvacha Atma Mayamrite Rajan Parasyanu Bhavatmana Nagate tartha sambandha Swapna drashtur ivanjasa. word to word. Shri Sukha Vacha. Shri Sukdev Goswami said, Atma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mayam, energy. Rite, without. Rajan, O king. Parasya, of the pure soul. Anubhava Atmana, of the purely conscious. Na, never. Ghatita, it can so happen. Artha, meaning. Sambandha, relation with the material body. Swapna, dream. Drashtu, of the seer. Eva, like. Anjasa, completely. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Charan Arvind Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Translation. Sri Sukdev Goswami said, O king, unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. That relationship is just like a dreamer's seeing his own body working. Purport. Maharaj Parikshit's question as to how a living entity began his material life, although he is apart from the material body and mind, is perfectly answered. The spirit soul is distinct from the material conception of his life, but he is absorbed in such a material conception because of being influenced by the external energy of the Lord, called Atma Maya. This has already been explained in the first canto in connection with Vyasadev's realization of the Supreme Lord and his external energy. The external energy is controlled by the Lord, and the living entities are controlled by the external energy, by the will of the Lord. Therefore, although the living entity is purely conscious in his pure state, he is subordinate to the will of the Lord in being influenced by the external energy of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita 15:15, also the same thing is confirmed. The Lord is present within the heart of every living entity, and all the living entities' consciousness and forgetfulness are influenced by the Lord. Now the next question automatically made will be why the Lord influences the living entity to such consciousness and forgetfulness. The answer is that the Lord clearly wishes that every living entity be in his pure consciousness as a part and parcel of the Lord, and thus be engaged in the loving service of the Lord as he is constitutionally made. But because the living entity is partially independent also, he may not be willing to serve the Lord, but may try to become as independent as the Lord is. All the non-devotee living entities are desirous of becoming equally as powerful as the Lord, although they are not fit to become so. The living entities are illusioned by the will of the Lord because they wanted to become like him. Like a person who thinks of becoming a king without possessing the necessary qualification. When the living entity desires to become the Lord himself, he is put in a condition of dreaming that he is a king. Therefore, the first sinful will of the living entity is to become the Lord, and the consequent will of the Lord is that the living entity forget his factual life and thus dream of the land of utopia, where he may become one like the Lord. The child cries to have the moon from the mother, and the mother gives the child a mirror to satisfy the crying and disturbing child with the reflection of the moon. Similarly, the crying child of the Lord is given over to the reflection, the material world, to lord it over as karmi, and to give this up in frustration to become one with the Lord. Both these stages are dreaming illusions only. There is no necessity of tracing out the history of when the living entity desired this. But the fact is that as soon as he desired it, he was put under the control of Atma Maya by the direction of the Lord. Therefore, the living entity in his material condition is dreaming falsely that this is mine and this is I. The dream is that the conditioned soul thinks of his material body as I, or falsely thinks that he is the Lord, and that everything in connection with that material body is mine. Thus, only in dream does the misconception of I and mine persist life after life. This continues life after life as long as the living entity is not purely conscious of his identity as the subordinate part and parcel of the Lord. In his pure consciousness, however, there is no such misconceived dream. And in that pure conscious state, the living entity does not forget that he is never the Lord, but that he is eternally the servitor of the Lord in transcendental love. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Anchakalpatrovesha Kripasindhavya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha. So the previous chapter was questions by King Parikshit. And now Sukdev Goswami starts to answer his questions. So this is the answer to a question Parikshit Maharaj asked in text 7 in the previous chapter. And he asked, it's a very commonly asked question, how is it that if the spirit soul is pure, how does a pure spirit soul end up acquiring a material body? Does it happen by an accident, or is there some other cause for it to happen? So here in these words we see how Srila Sukdev Goswami is saying that unless one is influenced by the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no meaning to the relationship of the pure soul in pure consciousness with the material body. So which energy is this that makes it happen? So in the purport we hear Srila Prabhupada, he quotes, he gives example of Vyasadeva, and in this chapter, in the 5th chapter, actually, Vyasadeva, when he was asked in the 7th chapter, it's explained, Vyasadeva, when he was advised by Narada Muni to compile Srimad Bhagavatam. And so when Vyasadeva, after taking instruction from Narada Muni, he sat in meditation, then he could see the Lord and different energies. And he also saw the external energy, which was actually behind in the shade of the Lord. So, and he could also see the remedial measures, how the conditioned beings can be helped to get out of this engagement that is enforced on a living entity. So the Krishna actually confirms how does it happens. He says in the Bhagavad Gita, Karanam guna sangosya. So it's the guna sangha that makes it happen. As a reading a room conversation, and Srila Prabhupada is talking to a gentleman from Gujarat, and they are talking about something on similar lines. So Srila Prabhupada is saying that how, like, if some person is being beaten by shoes, it's not a leela, he's being forced. He's been kicked by some force. Because this gentleman had other viewpoints. So he asked him, so if you are being beaten by shoes by some other person, do you think that is your leela? And the gentleman kind of got the point. So he was saying that the living entity constantly going from one life to another life, being engaged in different bodies. So in the purport it explains like how material energy actually operates. If one gets a body of a dog, one cannot choose how he wants to act. One has to act like a dog. He has to bark. So similarly, like a hog, if one gets a body of a hog, you can't expect to have delicious preparations that human beings may be having. They eat different kinds of food which are abominable foods for human beings. So same way, depending on whatever nature we are influenced by, we will act in that way. So that reminded me of the verse how Krishna says, Mahatmanas tu mam partha devim prakritim ashrita. So the Mahatmas, they take shelter of the Devi Prakriti. And what do? They are engaged in devotional service, devotional activities. They are not engaged in fruitive material activities. So when the living entity is influenced by the guna sangha, then they act according to that nature and the guna, ignorance, passion, goodness, whatever nature one is influenced by. Another place in the Bhagavatam it says, Karmana Deva Netrena. So how the material energy operates, there is the Supreme Personality supervising the activities of the energy. And based on the previous activities, the material energy crafts a suitable body to help that living entity to fulfill the previous desires they had. So Vyasadeva, to help these kind of living entities, he compiled Srimad Bhagavatam on the instruction of his spiritual master, Sri Narada Muni. Now, one may ask this question that why does the Lord allow such a thing to happen Because if we are already with the Lord, then why does Lord allow for the external energy to cover the living entities in that way? So at another place, in one of the purports I read, Srila Prabhupada gives this example. Just like a father, an affectionate father, they may put the child, when the child is being too unruly, they may put the child under a strict person, under a strict teacher, just to help them improve themselves. So similarly, as it said in the purport, the Lord does not desire for someone to be put in such a state, but actually the Lord wants the living entity to be with him. But influenced by the gunas, when a person thinks that he can enjoy being separate from Krishna, or like when such an illusion even increases more and they think they can even be the Lord themselves, that's when the living entity is covered, its pure consciousness is covered by the illusory energy. And that's when it's actually so when Vyasadeva he had this realization, he could also see that the illusory energy actually felt ashamed in one sense. So because she's also a devotee, so she doesn't want to do it, but it's a thankless task to help the living entity come back to proper consciousness, spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, so that they can come back to the understanding that I cannot be the master, but I can be completely happy in situated in devotional service, understanding my own position as the servant. So Krishna confirms Mame Vamso Jiva Loka Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. It's like already confirmed what's our position. We are eternally a servant. We cannot be the master no matter how we try. But to just like an affectionate father, Krishna allows the living entity, this dream world, to come and dream and execute all the desires we want to execute, forgetting Krishna. But then Krishna, just like Vyasadeva, he compiled Srimad Bhagavatam. Even Krishna himself comes and speaks Bhagavad Gita, and even within Srimad Bhagavatam, we know how Krishna is there at different occasions, personally speaking. Like we know the Uddhava Gita, Krishna personally gave instructions to Uddhava for living a life based on detachment. Now the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna spoke to Arjuna to tell him to act, living in the society. But so that's the Gita for action. But then in Uddhava Gita, Krishna tells Uddhava that just become detached from the external things and just fully dedicate, always think of me. And then he tells him to go and live with the devotees in Badrikashram. So that's the Gita for detachment, for the renounced. Of course, in both the Gitas, Krishna gives the processes how to execute, whether one is living in a big society or whether one is living in the forest. He gives the process how to execute in whatever situation one is. So the illusory energy, it's executing its thankless task, but at the same time, Lord is also giving opportunities for the living entities to come back to Him, taking to especially to devotional service, and even through other processes, gradually come to devotional service. One of the glories of devotional service is mentioned in the chapter 2 of 11th canto, and these Navayogendras, they are mentioning to King Yadu that even if one like performs devotional service with closed eyes, there is no chance of even tripping or falling. So what does it mean to perform service with closed eyes? It's mentioned that the two eyes of the Brahmanas are Smriti and Shruti. So if one doesn't know these, then they are like in ignorance, doing it with closed eyes. But still there is no chance of tripping or falling, because in the purport it's explained that it's because they are surrendered to the Lord. So as Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita himself, Devi hi esha gunamai mama maya duratyaya mam evai prapadyante mayam etam tarantite. So the one who actually surrenders to the Lord, that living entity, they can overcome the influence of this illusory potency of the Lord. Because ultimately it is also working under the will of the Lord. And actually, when one surrenders Durga, she actually helps that kind of living entity to advance in devotional service. She's a devotee, but she wouldn't do that unless she actually sees that this person sincerely wants to do it. So many times Srila Prabhupada would say that one has to serve sincerely, and then one will gradually progress. In the one of the talks I heard on this text, Dhira-lalita Prabhu, he was actually he was sharing his experience. He heard Srila Prabhupada speak on these words in Japan or somewhere, I can't remember exactly. But he was saying, so in that, at one point, Srila Prabhupada, he also played a short clip of that, recording of that talk. And Srila Prabhupada was saying that there are like so many people sharing spiritual knowledge, but it's only in Krishna consciousness that we are actually giving the process, how to overcome the influence of illusory energy, how to transcend this condition. Because like it says in the Bhagavatam that Aruya Krachrena Param Padam Tata Patanti Adha. One may artificially think that one is advanced, but they will gradually fall down. But a person who comes to devotional service, they will advance, they will progress, because they are not artificially thinking that I'm already, advanced. So one actually has to come to this understanding that Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, He is my master. And then from there, one has to come to understanding that when I perform devotional service with love, then it pleases Krishna. And the illusory energy, it releases from its, the one meaning of the guna is also rope. So one is bound by the rope, then one has to be released by someone who is already released from this. So when one comes to devotional service, comes in contact with devotees, then one can be released. Because a person who is already released, they can help someone bound by hands and feet to be released. Kapila Muni, he tells Mother Devahuti that bhakti even dissolves the subtle body without effort. Just like the fire in the stomach helps digest the food very easily. Similarly, the practice of devotional service helps dissolve even the subtle body, what to talk about the gross body. So one actually has to come to devotional service to become free from these modes of nature. Prahlad Maharaj, I'll mention this last point and then we can see if someone wants to share some realizations on this point. So Prahlad Maharaj, he tells Hiranyakashipu, Matir na Krishne parata swatova. So one's inclination to Krishna cannot be aroused if griha vurtanam. He says if one is attached to this understanding of this body is me and just to fulfill the desires of this body, then one's inclination to know Krishna, they are not aroused. So he tells Hiranyakashipu that people like you, they cannot know Krishna. But we can see Prahlad, he's like a 5-year-old boy and he actually heard, he learned the practice of bhakti while he was in the womb. So, but he could receive it because he's not envious of Krishna. So when the living entity, they wants to enjoy independently forgetting the Lord, then actually it's due to envy. That's the bottom line. Because they are thinking, oh, how can he have all the enjoyment? I can also enjoy. So one taking to bhakti, one is actually becoming free from this envy. Because one is understanding that whole position, my position is to be the servant. Actually, when one comes to this understanding, then one naturally glorifies the Lord. Bhavantam evanu charan nirantara prashanta nishesha manorathantra kadaham ekantika nitya kinkara praharsayishami sanatha jivitam. So one glorifies the Lord with beautiful prayers like that. One is like one sees the Lord as the befitting master, just like Parikshit Maharaj. He saw Sukdev Goswami as the perfect master to approach and ask these questions and clarify for everyone what's the best way to go about it, to transcend this illusory potency of the Lord and to come to the shelter of bhakti, to come to the shelter of the divine energy, to progress in devotional service. So, yeah, the answer is one comes under the influence of the gunamai, but then one has to transcend and come to bhakti so one can progress and become free from this. In the next few verses, there'll be more, it'll give more process how one can actually do it. So, yeah, I would ask if someone wants to share some realizations on these words you may have. Yes, Rabindranath Prabhu.
Yeah, you mentioned how the two eyes of the Brahmins are Shruti and Smriti.
Yes, Prabhu.
You mentioned how the two eyes of the Brahmins are Shruti and Smriti. Just wanted to, what's the reference for that?
It's in the 11th canto, chapter 2, text 35.
11.25. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
You explained how, Goddess Durga, he check us, how we are serious in devotional service, and she has this, unthankful task to do this service.
Thankless
But when
task.
she see that we are serious, she start to help us. So can you explain or give some example how she is actually helping us? Which way, how,
Yes,
some example.
there is a wonderful pastime. I think it's of Jada Bharat in the Bhagavatam. So these Durga Bhaktas, they tried to sacrifice Jada Bharat, and then Durga Devi herself protected Jada Bharat. So like, what are you guys doing? So I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, Maharaj. So he was asking, how is it that like Durga Devi, she helps a devotee trying to practice devotional service? How does she help if she's keeping the conditioned souls entrapped? So I was mentioning that pastime where Jada Bharat was protected by Durga Devi when the Durga Bhaktas, I think it was Jada Bharat, the Durga Bhaktas, they were trying to sacrifice Jada Bharat to, it's in the fifth canto. Anyone else? Okay, I think it's time, sir. ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय.